Welcome, fellow travelers of the Forgotten Roads and Wanderers of Wilds, to the Verdant Enclave. I'm your host and sometimes friendly DM. More relevant to today's discussion, I'm also your fellow wanderer and wilderness guide to the Ranger class of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Let's talk battle damage.
Before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to cover some details in this new format for analyzing the battle performances of the different characters. I've had to change the formula for the baseline comparison, and I'd also like to outline some of the house rules we use during play.
The formula Chris at Treatmonk's Temple uses variables which, while including the possibilities of the game, unfortunately degrade the overall accuracy of the formula, as it adds in possibility without regard for the fact that the chance doesn't factor into averages. Advantage, disadvantage, and critical hits are outliers of battle data, not constants, whereas making attacks and hits are constants. Further, his method calculates for the round. While this isn't necessarily a problem, it isn't working well with the manner I've been tracking damage for the Land of the Hunter. Consequently, I've modified Chris's approach, first by removing those variable components of the formula, thereby reducing it to the more basic form of chance to hit and average of damage dice plus the appropriate modifiers. I chose a base armor class of 15 to determine the basic chance to hit, and then ran the numbers as average per hit rather than per round.
There are 3 house rules we use that do have a small impact on the outcomes of battle analysis. First up is massive damage. If an enemy creature is reduced to 1 HP by a single attack, I have that creature roll a Constitution saving throw. If they then fail the DC that I set, then I rule it as massive damage, and the creature dies instantly. This can result in an opponent being removed earlier than they would otherwise, thereby reducing the chances of gathering further data. Second is glancing blow. When an attack misses by 1 point below the targeted armor class, I allow the hit regardless, but I award resistance against that particular attack's damage to the targeted creature. This can inflate the actual number of hits the characters earn, as well as the attacks that they make, and the amount of damage they accrue, since I record the damage as rolled, rather than accounting for resistance or vulnerability. However, it does mean that the characters have to keep fighting those who survive, so they still have to earn their victory. And finally, critical hits. Per the player's handbook, a natural 20 on an attack doubles all the damage dice for that attack. Rather than simply doubling the relevant dice, I allow critical hits to maximize the damage of the doubled dice, and we roll the regular dice as normal. This can result in very high numbers if characters manage to score several critical hits, and even more so for the rogue, who gets to double all of their sneak attack damage to the maximum, plus the normal sneak attack damage dice. The following aren't technically house rules per se, but they are things to keep in mind as we go through the numbers gathered from gameplay. First, all players, including the Dungeon Master player character, are all using strictly Player's Handbook material. Second, every combat encounter, excepting a few calculation errors in early gameplay, has been and will continue to be rated a deadly encounter from the Dungeon Master's Guide, with one caveat. When calculating the experience for the encounter, I skip entirely modifying the experience points for multiple monsters. Now, this does not result in easier combats, Rather, it increases the danger the characters face, with the express intention of pushing the characters to use all their features, abilities, and players' wits to their utmost, while providing the most opportunity to collect as much relevant data as possible. Third, I quite enjoy homebrewing magical items for the characters and working them into the world of the game, so certain unusual things might occur, such as a player armor class of 25, but I also make them earn those very powerful items, while at the same time restricting all access to any plus insert number here weapons. Given the enhanced deadly nature of the combats, I also allow many of the optional combat rules provided in the Dungeon Master's Guide, including cleaving through creatures, though it has been modified to include ranged attacks instead of just melee. I've used the words damage rolled several times, but it was brought to my attention that this could be misleading, especially in regard to area of effect abilities if I otherwise say something like damage dealt or shatter dealt this much damage. The number rolled on the dice is not the same as the damage dealt in such cases. For example, if I as the ranger use Hail of Thorns, I roll the damage once and apply that to all affected creatures. If I use the terminology of dealt, then I should be accounting for the damage dealt to all the affected creatures. This, however, can be something that might end up being visually unverifiable, as I do not always have the recording screen aligned properly. For the sake of clarity and transparency, then, I have been and will continue attempting to record only the damage rolled, as that is visually verifiable in the chat window. Keep in mind that this could potentially undersell the value of certain AoE abilities and spells, since I won't be reporting how much total is dealt. I could try to report on the number of creatures affected, as well as whether they succeeded or failed on any relevant saving throws, but it will be a major alteration to the style of reporting previously done. If you want me to start tracking those details as well, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I will continue as I have been. There have been two primary questions I am examining in this adventure, but I chose to add an extension to one of them, as it is a statement I've heard before in relation to rangers. The original two questions are, does the ranger need Hunter's Mark in order to do comparable damage? And, are fighters better as archers than rangers? The extended question is, do rangers need their spells in order to keep up with martial class damage output? To clarify, comparable should be understood as equivalent. In other words, in order for the question to be regarded as yes, then rangers would have to use Hunter's Mark in order to do the same damage as a fighter or a paladin or a rogue, or any of the other martial classes. If Hunter's Mark is not needed in order to accomplish comparability, then the question would be answered no.
Let's get started with Thea the Rogue, Thief subclass level 15. Of the subclass features, Thea used Fast Hands 6 times successfully, Second Story Work 20 times in order to get into better or necessary positions, and Supreme Sneak 3 times. Use Magic Device was used 1 time. General abilities are those abilities which anyone can have or choose, such as feats, of which Thea has Skulker and Sharpshooter. Skulker was used to mitigate disadvantage on perception checks, hide, or remain hidden successfully 7 times, and Sharpshooter was used 21 times successfully out of 23 uses, adding 210 points to Thea's total damage rolled for this level, which is 14% of the total. Over the course of level 15, Thea made 42 attacks, 40 of which were hits, for a hit ratio of 95.24%. Class features refers specifically to core class abilities, such as Cunning Action, the rogue ability to hide, disengage, and dash, with a bonus action instead of an action.
Thea used her bonus action to hide successfully 31 times, 1 time to disengage, and dash 8 times. Uncanny Dodge was used 7 times to reduce damage taken by 53 points, and Evasion was used 7 times to escape all damage, while Reliable Talent was used 17 times successfully. Note the Reliable Talent takes applicable, potentially failing rolls and turns them into successes. Most of these were used for stealth checks. Thea used a bead of force for 14 points of damage. As mentioned before, Sharpshooter contributed 210 points of damage. For weapon damage, Thea rolled 387 points of damage, while Sneak Attack dice rolled 831 points, altogether producing 1,489 points of damage rolled for the level. Looking at the average per hit, weapons only, Thea managed 9.68, which is 1.52 below the baseline for this level. However, when all applicable damage, in this case excluding the bead of force damage as that is reliant on a saving throw instead of an attack roll, is added in, Thea's average per hit becomes 36.88, which is a stunning 25.68 above the baseline. Let's move on to Adrian the Fighter, Eldritch Knight subclass, level 15. General abilities are features which anyone can choose and use, while subclass features are limited. As a fighter's access to magic is a subclass choice, Adrian's magic usage for level 15 will be reported here. For his subclass features, Adrian used Eldritch Strike 0 times this level. War Magic was used 7 times to action, cast a cantrip, and bonus action, attack the weapon. Minor Illusion, Message, and Dancing Lights were used 0 times. Firebolt was used 10 times, reducing 88 points of damage, which is 10% of this level's total damage rolled. Expeditious Retreat was used 1 time for 2 dashes. Magic Missile was used 0 times. Shield was used 3 times, and Long Strider was used once. Scorching Ray was used once at 3rd level for 21 points of damage, 2% of damage rolled. Gust of Wind was used 0 times. Lightning Bolt was used 2 times for 47 points, another 5% of level damage rolled. Keep in mind that this is only reporting the damage rolled, not the damage dealt. Lightning Bolt did affect more than one creature at a time each time it was cast, so this does not represent the damage dealt to all the affected creatures, only the number rolled. Warcaster was used roughly 5 times to cast spells while hands were full. There were no uses for advantage on Constitution saving throws against damage. Mobile was used to negate difficult terrain 0 times, and to negate attacks of opportunity 4 times. In the course of level 15, Adrian made 72 attacks, 65 of which were hits, for a 90.28% hit ratio. Magic damage was covered already, but is summarized here. From class features, Adrian used Second Wind 3 times, regaining 62 hit points. Action Surge was used once to cast Scorching Ray, once to free his mount, and 3 times to take the attack action for another 95 points of damage, 14% of level damage. Indomitable was used to turn 2 out of 3 failed saving throws into successes. For weapon damage alone, Adrian rolled 605 points. Action Surge produced an additional 95, Firebolt 88, Scorching Ray 21, and Lightning Bolt 47, bringing Adrian's total damage rolled for this level to 856. Without Action Surge, Adrian's average per hit is 9.31, 1.89 below the baseline, which was better than the Rogue's average weapon damage per hit without Sneak Attack. With Action Surge added in, Adrian bumped it up to 10.77, which is 0.43 below the baseline. Finally, Varen the Ranger, Hunter subclass, level 15. For subclass features, Varen used Colossus Slayer for 34 times, generating 152 points of damage, which was 10% of damage rolled for this level. Steel Will was used 0 times, and Volley was used 11 times, generating an extra 60 attacks, 48 of which were hits
for 80% hit ratio with volley. This added 414 points, 27% of Varen's total damage rolled. From general abilities, Sharpshooter was used 29 times, but only added 230 points. This was 15% of Varen's total damage rolled. Varen made 65 attacks this level, 57 of which were hits, for an 87.69% hit ratio. When volley is considered, this becomes 125 attacks and 105 hits, for an attack ratio of 84%. Animal Messenger, Locate Animals or Plants, and Jump were used 0 times. Hunter's Mark was used 4 times, adding 94 points of damage, 6% of damage rolled. Longstrider was used twice at 3rd level and once at 1st level. Non-Detection was used 5 times, and Plant Growth was used once, over 8 hours. Spike Growth was used 1 time, generating 168 points, or 11% of damage rolled. Locate Creature was used 1 time, in order to relocate the party after misleading enemy forces. Favorite Enemy was used 3 of 3 times successfully to track selected enemies, not counting the number of times that the added languages had an effect. And Natural Explorer was used 39 times distinctively. Passive uses are harder to track due to their constant applicability. Primeval Awareness was used 3 times, and Landstride was used 6 times. Hide in Plain Sight was used 1 time, and Vanish was used 17 times, 13 of which were successful hiding checks. Hiding his trail is in constant use, unless deliberately chosen otherwise, such as to mislead pursuers. With weapons only, Varen made 490 points of damage. 13 points of damage came from an environmental effect. 152 came from Colossus Slayer, 414 from Volley, 94 from Hunter's Mark, 230 from Sharpshooter, and 168 from Spike Growth, for a total of 1,561 points of damage rolled for this level. Varen's weapon damage per hit, not including the hits from Volley, comes to 8.6, 2.6 below the baseline, performing less efficiently than the Rogue and the Fighter. With all applicable non-magical damage, Varen's average per hit comes to 12.25, 1.05 above the baseline, and better than the Fighter with Action Surge included. When all relevant damage is included, consequently excluding Spike Growth and environmental damage, Varen's damage per hit becomes 19.81, 8.61 above the baseline. Here you see the average per hit by level for all 3 characters, compared to the baseline established earlier. This is strictly weapon damage, no unique class or subclass features, general abilities, or magic involved. The blue line is the baseline. The orange line represents Varen's progression, but somehow Adrian and Thea's line colors were switched, so now the yellow line represents Adrian and the gray line represents Thea. Keep in mind that the baseline assumes a constant enemy armor class of 15, which isn't happening for most enemies in gameplay at these levels, and also does not take into account the possibility of critical hits, natural ones, at advantage or disadvantage. Let's add in now the other applicable damage riders. The blue baseline is the same, but now all applicable class and subclass features, general abilities, and applicable magic are added in. Prior to the 11th level, the rogues, still represented by the yellow line, average per hit climbs and plummets almost level to level, but since 11th level has climbed fairly steadily right up until 14th level. However, the rogue remains high in efficiency compared to the other 2, a direct result of using sneak attack. The gray line, representing the fighter by comparison, stays fairly consistent to the baseline, with occasional dips or rises, despite the fact that the characters rarely deal with a consistent armor class of 15. This is not underperforming, except for what might be considered within a margin of error, and shows that even when not played to its greater strengths, the fighter is a highly capable class to play. The Ranger is shown by the orange line and has an interesting progression. Except for 9th and 10th levels, the Ranger performs above the baseline fairly consistently, though obviously not in the same heights of efficiency as the Rogue. To note, this is about the same point in the game, roughly, where the Ranger switched to primarily using a sling due to lack of wood for the making of arrows. For the purpose of this discussion, efficiency is the ratio of useful outcome to the total input in any system. Specifically, here, the combat system of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. What is being displayed here is that the Rogue is the most efficient combatant. That is, the Rogue uses comparatively few attack actions to gain purely high damage results, so long as the Rogue can use at least sneak attack. The Fighter is perhaps merely efficient, rather than inefficient, because the Fighter stays so close to the baseline so consistently. The Ranger could be considered as a good efficiency combatant, performing more often than not above both the Fighter and the baseline. With the efficiency of the characters established, let's move to the damage output. Appearing now on screen are each character's total damage rolled per level, from 1st to 15th level. This metric is measuring the damage rolled, not damage dealt. This consequently ignores situational aspects such as immunity, resistance, and vulnerability. As the graph's title says, this is based on solely weapon damage rolled, without unique features like sneak attack, action surge, Colossus Slayer, or volley, no abilities like sharpshooter, and no magic such as Hunter's Mark or Lightning Bolt. It does, however, include extra attack, as this feature is much more difficult to sparse out than I anticipated. Consequently, the Fighter's extra attack, gained at 11th level, is still being included on this graph. This metric should still help us determine how necessary Ranger's magic is to be comparable to at least the Rogue and the Fighter. Let's jump in. The blue columns represent the Ranger, the orange columns are for the Fighter, and the gray columns are for the Rogue. The Ranger has outperformed the other two classes 10 out of 15 levels. The Fighter has passed the other two classes 4 times out of 15 levels. And if you are watching, you will see that those 4 occurrences have only occurred after gaining the extra attack at 11th level. The Rogue has passed the other two classes 1 time out of 15 levels. Thus far, the Ranger has dealt more damage 66.67% of the time, the Fighter 26.67%, and the Rogue 6.67%. These damage totals do exclude the Ranger's magic and features, suggesting so far that Hunter's Mark is not required for the Ranger to do comparable damage, though it does help a little with the Ranger's combat efficiency. Further, this suggests to me that, so far at least, the Ranger does not need their magic in order to keep up with the Fighter or the Rogue, as the Ranger has surpassed them more times than not. But now let's take a look at what happens when all the relevant features and abilities are in. Now class and subclass features, general abilities, and magic have been added in. This does include the environmental damage, but note that this graph only includes damage rolled, not damage dealt. So if an effect hits more than one creature, I only captured the damage rolled. With that out of the way, the blue columns represent the Ranger, who now surpasses the other two classes 12 out of 15 levels, or 80% of levels played. The Rogue has surpassed the two other classes 3 out of 15 levels, or 20% of levels played. The Fighter has surpassed the Rogue 6 out of the 15 levels played, but has not surpassed the Ranger once. Out of the 20 levels available, the Ranger has thus far outperformed the other two classes 12 out of 20, or 60%, while the Rogue has outperformed the other classes 3 levels out of 20, or 15%. The Fighter has outperformed the Rogue only, not once the Ranger, and 5 levels remain for gameplay out of 20, for the leftover 25%. This shows that despite the Rogue's incredible efficiency, its total damage output is not to the same level as the Fighter, though on occasion the rogue can deliver absolutely enormous amounts of damage. But the Ranger has, thus far, more often than not outperformed the other two classes, with and without magic, with and without feats, with and without class and subclass features. I feel I should further point out that since roughly 10th level, Varen the Ranger has relied almost solely on his sling, dealing only 1d4 plus his dexterity modifier, while the other two have used longbow and rapier, both dealing 1d8 plus dexterity modifiers. Yet the Ranger has still been able to outperform. However, 5 more levels of gameplay await to be explored. I hope you're finding this analysis as interesting as I am, and that you will continue to explore the Ranger class with me, as well as joining Adrian, Thea, and Varen in the Land of the Hunter. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.